You wake up in the morning, and that feeling is already there, settled in your chest like an invisible weight no one around you can see. It's the suffocating awareness that your life isn't going anywhere, that the days repeat in a routine that feels safe, but that deep down you know is a cage. You look in the mirror and see someone who's ticking all the expected boxes, following all the social rules, doing everything they're supposed to. But a question echoes silently, one you try to drown out with distractions. If I'm doing everything right, why do I feel so empty? You head to work, engage in the small talk, smile when you need to. But beneath that functional mask is a profound unease, an inner voice whispering that you're wasting your existence, letting life happen to you instead of truly living it. At night, when you're finally alone and the silence descends, that voice gets louder. You try to sleep, but the thoughts flood in. How much longer am I going to live like this? When did I hand over the reins of my life? Why am I waiting for something external to change when deep down, I know the change has to come from me? And then comes the paralyzing fear, that existential terror of looking at your life and realizing you're just a passive spectator in your own story, outsourcing your choices, blaming circumstances, waiting for someone or something to fix the problem only you can solve. Viktor Frankl, a man who faced the absolute horror of the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something most people run from their entire lives. There's no escaping the responsibility for your own existence. And this truth, this discovery he forged in the crucible of the most extreme suffering a human being can experience, has the power to free you from this invisible prison you're living in. But I have to warn you, this truth isn't comfortable. It doesn't offer easy excuses or magic solutions. It demands something from you that might be the hardest thing there is: fully embracing authorship of your life. Frankl observed something extraordinary in Auschwitz, something that defied all logic about human behavior. Faced with the same brutal conditions of starvation, cold, slave labor, and imminent death, some prisoners collapsed completely, becoming animals who would steal the last crust of bread from dying companions, while others, in the exact same circumstances, maintained their human dignity, shared their last portion of soup, offered words of comfort, even knowing they might be next. What separated these two groups wasn't the external conditions, as everyone was equally stripped of everything. What distinguished them was something internal, something Frankl called the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. While traditional psychology of the time saw humans as products of their conditions, determined by their instincts or environment, Frankl witnessed that even when everything is taken from you, when you're reduced to a number tattooed on your arm, when your existence is treated as disposable, there remains a fundamental choice: how you will respond to it. And this choice, this irrevocable ability to position yourself in the face of life, carries the full weight of existential responsibility. You can't blame your circumstances when you realize that even in the worst circumstances ever documented in human history, some individuals found space to exercise freedom and dignity. This understanding leads us to the core of what Frankl discovered, and what most people spend their lives avoiding. Responsibility isn't something you can accept or refuse. It simply is. You are responsible for your life whether you like it or not, whether you consciously embrace it or not. The only difference is that when you deny this responsibility, when you outsource it to your circumstances, to other people, to your past, to society, to the economy, you don't eliminate responsibility. You just live in existential bad faith, in a fantasy of powerlessness that keeps you trapped. Frankl developed the concept that every moment of life presents us with a question, and we are called to answer. But here's the radical twist. It's not you asking life what it can offer you. It's life asking you what you can offer it. By inverting this fundamental equation, Frankl dismantles the entire structure of superficial self-help and narcissistic happiness-seeking. Life owes you nothing. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It's not here to fulfill your desires. You are the one indebted to life. You are the one who needs to respond to the specific call that each situation places before you. And when you realize this, when this truth truly sinks in, something extraordinary happens. You move from the position of a passive victim to the position of a responsible author of your existence. But here comes the part no one wants to hear, the brutal truth that makes people recoil and seek more comfortable philosophies. You are responsible not just for your actions, but for your very capacity to find or create meaning. When someone comes with the complaint that life has no meaning, that everything is absurd, that there is no purpose, Frankl confronts that person with a devastating question. Who said meaning was supposed to be handed to you? The lack of meaning you experience isn't a deficiency of life. It's a summons for you to take on your existential task of discovering and realizing the unique meaning only you can fulfill. Each person has a unique calling, a specific set of circumstances, relationships, talents, and challenges that form their singular field of responsibility. No one can answer for you. No one can live your life in your place. And when you die, the unique possibility you carried of bringing something to the world that only you could bring dies with you. This uniqueness isn't a cause for narcissistic pride. It's a cause for absolute responsibility. You can't trade places with someone else. You can't transfer your existential task to anyone. What life expects of you in this specific moment, in this concrete situation you find yourself in, only you can answer. Frankl discovered something even deeper when he worked with patients suffering from what he called existential emptiness. These people didn't necessarily have psychological problems in the traditional sense. They weren't neurotic in the Freudian sense, but they were paralyzed by a sense of futility, by the question, what's it all for? And as Frankl dug deeper, he found a recurring pattern. These people were running from the responsibility of making real choices. They wanted guarantees before acting. They wanted absolute certainty that their choices would work out. They wanted someone or something external to validate their decisions. But existential responsibility doesn't offer those guarantees. You have to choose without fully knowing the outcomes. You have to commit to a path knowing you could be wrong. You have to take risks because the only alternative is paralysis and a life-in-death state. The existential vacuum, according to Frankl, isn't an illness to be cured with medication or conventional therapeutic techniques. It's a summons that needs to be answered with responsible action. When you fill that void not with distractions or temporary pleasures, but with assumed responsibility, with genuine commitment to something larger than yourself, the void transforms into fulfillment. And now I want to pause and really talk to you, because I know many people watching this video are carrying this weight in silence. You feel like you're avoiding making important decisions, that you're postponing choices you know you need to make, that you're waiting for the perfect moment that never arrives, while life slips through your fingers. So tell me here in the comments, do you recognize this pattern of escaping responsibility in yourself, this attempt to outsource your choices and then blame circumstances when nothing changes? If so, simply write, I escape my existential responsibility. That's all. And know that by doing so, you're taking the first step out of denial. You're acknowledging something most people never have the courage to admit. By sharing your experience here, you not only validate your own journey, but show dozens of others that they're not alone in this struggle against the temptation of existential escape. Let's create a community here of people brave enough to look this truth in the eye. The truly unsettling question Frankl poses to us is this: if you are fully responsible for your life, if you can't blame your circumstances or your past, if the task of finding meaning is non-transferable, then what's stopping you from living fully? The honest answer for most people is fear. Fear of failing, fear of disappointing, fear of discovering you're not as special as you'd like to believe, fear of taking on the full weight of freedom. It's more comfortable to live in the fantasy that you'd be happy and fulfilled if it weren't for this or that external circumstance. It's safer to blame the system, the economy, family, the past, because as long as you maintain this victim narrative, you don't have to truly risk. But Frankl dismantles this escape strategy by showing that even in the concentration camps, where the justifications for abandoning human dignity were absolutely valid, some men and women chose differently. If they could exercise responsibility and freedom in Auschwitz, what's your excuse? This question isn't meant to humiliate, but to awaken. You have infinitely more resources, more possibilities, more objective freedom than those prisoners had. And yet you feel powerless. The problem isn't your circumstances. The problem is the narrative you've built about your circumstances. Frankl worked with a patient who perfectly illustrates this point, a young professional who had every external condition for happiness, a good job, health, relationships, but who lived in a constant state of dissatisfaction and apathy. When Frankl began to investigate, he discovered this man was trapped in a pattern of perpetual waiting. He waited for the perfect promotion before truly committing to his work. He waited for the perfect partner before opening up emotionally in relationships. He waited for the perfect inspiration before starting creative projects. He waited for the perfect conditions before making any significant move. This man had turned waiting into a sophisticated form of avoiding responsibility. While waiting, he didn't have to risk, he didn't have to face the possibility of failure. He didn't have to bear the weight of his choices. Frankl confronted this patient with an uncomfortable truth. You're not waiting for the right conditions. You're waiting for a version of life that doesn't require you to be responsible, and that life doesn't exist. Real life, the only life available to you, demands that you choose now. With the imperfect information you have, with the limited resources available, with the real risk of being wrong. The alternative isn't waiting until you have certainty, because that certainty will never come. The alternative is acting responsibly, acknowledging the inherent uncertainty of the human condition. This understanding leads us to one of Frankl's most radical concepts. You are responsible even for the unavoidable suffering in your life, not because you caused that suffering, but because you are the one who must choose what attitude to adopt in its face. Frankl differentiated between unnecessary suffering, which we should eliminate, and unavoidable suffering, which we must transform into human achievement through our attitude. When you lose someone you love, when you face a serious illness, when you experience an injustice, you didn't choose these situations, but you choose how to respond to them. And that choice of response, according to Frankl, is where the greatest possibility for human growth and fulfillment lies. A man who accepts his unavoidable suffering with dignity, who finds meaning not despite the suffering but through it, that man achieves a dimension of human fulfillment that no life of pure pleasure could provide. This isn't romanticizing suffering, it's recognizing that when suffering is unavoidable, the only thing still within your control is your attitude, and that attitude determines whether you will be broken by suffering or refined by it. Frankl developed a therapeutic technique based on this understanding of radical responsibility. When a patient came with symptoms of anxiety or phobia, instead of trying to eliminate the symptom directly, Frankl used what he called paradoxical intention. He asked the patient to try to intensify the symptom, to actively take responsibility for what was previously seen as something that happened to them passively. A man who suffered from chronic insomnia and spent hours in bed tormented by the impossibility of sleeping was instructed by Frankl to try to stay awake as long as possible, to compete with himself to see how long he could resist sleep. The paradoxical result was that the man began to sleep normally. Why did this work? By actively taking ownership of his symptom, by stopping the fight against it, as if it were an external force victimizing him, the man broke the cycle of anticipatory anxiety that fueled his insomnia. This clinical example illustrates a broader principle. When you take full responsibility, even for aspects of your life that seem beyond your control, you paradoxically gain power over them. As long as you see yourself as a passive victim of your circumstances, you are genuinely powerless. When you recognize that there is always a space for choice, even if it's just the choice of your attitude, you reclaim your existential power. If these ideas resonate deeply with you, if you feel you've finally found someone who understands that life demands more from you than passive conformity, subscribe to this channel. Here we explore the thinking of Frankl and other philosophers weekly, offering real answers to the existential void so many of us carry in silence. This isn't a superficial self-help channel promising easy happiness. It's a space for those courageous enough to face difficult truths and take responsibility for their own transformation. You don't have to walk this journey of self-discovery alone. Click the subscribe button and become part of this community of people brave enough to question, seek, and grow. What does this mean for us today, living in societies where we've never had so much objective freedom and yet so much a sense of powerlessness? Frankl would say we're suffering from a collective neurogenic neurosis, a spiritual sickness born from the refusal to take existential responsibility. We live in a culture that constantly offers excuses. You're a product of your childhood, you're a victim of the system, you're determined by your genes, you're conditioned by society. All these claims have elements of truth, but when they become the dominant narrative of your life, they steal the one thing no one can take from you: your ability to choose how to respond. The contemporary culture of victimhood, where everyone competes to prove who suffered more, who has more justifications for not taking responsibility, is the exact opposite of what Frankl teaches. It's not that real suffering doesn't exist, it's not that injustices aren't real. But when you define your identity primarily as a victim, you trap yourself in a narrative of powerlessness that prevents you from living fully. Frankl survived one of the greatest crimes against humanity ever committed, and yet he didn't define himself primarily as a victim. He defined himself as someone with a task to fulfill, a meaning to realize, a responsibility that not even Auschwitz could erase. The responsibility Frankl describes isn't an oppressive burden that crushes you, though it might seem that way at first. It is, in fact, the source of your human dignity and freedom. When you accept that you are fully responsible for your life, you simultaneously recognize that you have the power to change it. You're no longer waiting for the world to change, for people to change, for conditions to align perfectly. You realize that change begins with your decision to respond differently, to adopt a different attitude, to make choices aligned with values you consciously choose. And here's another crucial aspect Frankl emphasizes. Responsibility always implies responsibility to something or someone greater than yourself. You are not responsible in an egocentric vacuum. You are responsible to life, to other human beings, to the unique possibilities your existence holds. This dimension of self-transcendence, this specifically human capacity to point beyond oneself, is what transforms responsibility from a burden into a purpose. When you are committed to something larger than your own comfort or pleasure, when you realize your life has implications for others, that your choices matter in a cosmic sense, then responsibility becomes a source of energy and direction. Frankl tells the story of an elderly man who came to see him, consumed by deep depression after the death of his intensely loved wife. This man no longer saw any point in living. Everything seemed empty and purposeless. Frankl didn't try to console him with cliches or minimize his pain. Instead, he asked a simple but devastating question. What would have happened if you had died first and your wife had to face your death? The man immediately replied, "Oh, that would have been terrible for her. She would have suffered immensely." Frankl then showed him, "So you see, your suffering has meaning. You are sparing her from having to go through that. You are taking on that suffering in her place." The man's face transformed. He didn't stop suffering at that moment, but his suffering gained meaning. It ceased to be absurd and became a sacrifice of love. And with meaning, even the greatest suffering becomes bearable. This clinical case perfectly illustrates how responsibility and meaning are intertwined. The man could have chosen the narrative of being a victim of the cruel life that took his beloved. But when he accepted the responsibility of carrying that suffering as an act of love, everything changed. The objective situation remained the same, but his attitude transformed meaningless suffering into significant sacrifice. But the truly uncomfortable question we need to face is this. If responsibility is so liberating, why do so many people run from it? Frankl identified that there's a deep existential fear associated with total freedom. When you can no longer blame anyone or anything, when you are the sole author of your story, you are also solely responsible for the outcomes. If your life is unsatisfactory, you can no longer point fingers at external circumstances. You have to look in the mirror and recognize that your choices, your attitudes, your way of responding to life are what created that dissatisfaction. This is terrifying for many people because it means there's nowhere to hide. But Frankl would argue that this initial terror is the birth of authenticity. When you stop pretending to be powerless, when you embrace your condition of being responsible, you finally begin to truly live. You may fail, you will make mistakes, you will make choices you later regret, but those will be your choices, your failures, your mistakes, and therefore your real life instead of an outsourced existence where you just blame and complain. Modern society offers countless sophisticated ways to escape responsibility. You can get lost in endless entertainment, you can get high on compulsive work, you can hide in relationships where you dump the responsibility for your happiness onto someone else. You can become a professional victim who collects injustices and traumas as excuses for not living fully. You can get lost in ideologies that explain everything and demand nothing personally from you. Frankl would say all these are forms of existential bad faith, ways of avoiding confrontation with your own freedom and responsibility, and the price of this escape is sky high. It's the existential void, the feeling of being alive but not truly living, of having a life but not being its owner. You become a spectator of your own existence, a critical commentator who complains about everything but doesn't take the risk of changing anything. And the longer you live like this, the harder it becomes to break this pattern because you build an entire identity based on powerlessness. Surround yourself with people who validate your excuses, create an elaborate narrative that justifies your paralysis. Frankl discovered that the way to break this pattern isn't through grand dramatic revolutions, but through what he called situated responsibility. You don't need to change your whole life at once. You don't need total clarity about your cosmic purpose. You just need to respond responsibly to the concrete situation before you right now. Is there someone who needs your help? Is there a task you're avoiding? Is there a difficult conversation that needs to happen? Is there a project you abandoned? Start there. Life doesn't ask you abstract questions about universal meaning. It asks you concrete questions about how you're going to respond to this specific situation. And when you respond responsibly to a situation, when you make an authentic choice based on values you consciously choose, you experience a moment of existential fulfillment that no amount of pleasure can provide. It's the deep satisfaction of knowing you acted as a free, responsible human being, not as an animal reacting to stimuli or a passive victim of circumstances. If you're starting to see your own life in a new light, if you're recognizing patterns of escape you've kept hidden for years, hit that like button on this video so more people can discover these transformative ideas from Frankl. Every like helps the algorithm show this content to someone who might be desperate for an alternative to the victim narrative that dominates our culture. You might be helping someone take their first step toward an authentic, responsible life. The most radical dimension of responsibility, according to Frankl, is that you are responsible for responding to the unique call that only you can hear. There's no instruction manual for your life, no one-size-fits-all formula. You need to discover what life is asking of you specifically, in this unique moment, in this particular configuration of circumstances. And this discovery doesn't happen through narcissistic introspection, where you get obsessed with yourself, trying to figure out who you are. Frankl sharply criticized this tendency in modern psychology to focus excessively on the self. The discovery of your unique meaning happens when you forget yourself and fully engage with a task, with another person, with a cause. It's in the movement of self-transcendence, when you move outside yourself toward the world, that you paradoxically discover who you truly are and what you should do. An artist doesn't discover their art by looking inward, they discover it by creating. A scientist doesn't discover their calling in solitary meditation, they discover it by researching. You don't discover your unique responsibility by avoiding life. You discover it by living, by making mistakes, by adjusting, by trying again. Frankl also confronts us with the radical finitude of our responsibility. You don't have infinite time, you're going to die. And with your death, the unique possibilities you carried die too. This isn't a reason for despair. It's a reason for existential urgency. Every moment you waste in escape, in denial, in passive waiting, is a moment that never comes back. The possibilities you don't realize today disappear forever, because tomorrow you will face different possibilities. This transience of life, which could be seen as an argument for nihilism, is in Frankl's view the exact opposite. It's what gives weight and seriousness to our choices. If you had eternity, your choices wouldn't matter as much. You could always do differently later. But you don't have eternity. You only have this moment, this situation, this opportunity to respond. And when it passes forever. This makes every choice absolutely serious. Every moment of responsibility taken or avoided profoundly significant. The truth nobody wants to hear about responsibility, the truth Frankl forces us to confront, is this: you already know what you need to do. Deep down, beneath all the rationalizations and excuses, you know which choices you're avoiding, which conversations you're postponing, what changes your life demands. The problem isn't a lack of clarity. The problem is a lack of courage. It's easier to feign confusion than to admit cowardice. It's more comfortable to say, I don't know what to do, than to acknowledge, I know exactly what to do, but I'm afraid to do it. Frankl would say, stop waiting for more clarity, more certainty, better conditions. Act now with the clarity you have, with the resources available, taking the risk of being wrong. Because the alternative isn't eventually acting with total certainty. The alternative is perpetual paralysis disguised as prudence. And when you finally have the courage to act, when you take full responsibility for your life without excuses or escapism, you'll discover something extraordinary. You are much stronger, much more capable, much freer than you imagined. All that powerlessness you felt was self-imposed. That prison was built by you. And if you built it, you can deconstruct it. So here's the final challenge this video poses to you. What are you going to do with this understanding? You can watch, agree intellectually, feel inspired for a few minutes, and then go back to the same patterns of escape and victimhood. Or you can take this as an existential call to responsible action. Identify a specific area of your life where you are running from responsibility, where you are blaming circumstances instead of making choices. It might be a relationship you need to confront or end. It might be a career you need to change. It might be a destructive habit you need to abandon. It might be a project you need to start. Identify it now and take one concrete action in the next 24 hours. It doesn't have to be a huge action, but it needs to be a real action that shows you're taking ownership. And when you do that, when you truly act, you'll experience something no motivational video can give you: the deep satisfaction of having lived as a free and responsible human being, even if just for a moment. And that moment could be the start of a complete transformation of your existence. Life is asking you a question right now at this very moment. What's your answer going to be?